Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for episode 10 of our Fireside Chat series. I know there's been a big gap between episodes 9 and 10, but the fintech news cycle has been quite intense lately, and I'll try to put up more interviews more consistently. Anyways, today we are joined by Robin Lee, the co founder of HelloGo, the beloved goal saving apps that discontinued its services last Thursday. Incidentally, that was on my birthday, Robin. I don't know if you knew that.
Yes.
I remember I first came across HelloGo nearly a decade ago before we even started FinTech News Malaysia. And I don't know if you remember this. It was in one of those FinTech meetups that Wilson, the now FinTech president, alongside Jason Yanming and all used to organize. And I stood at the back of the room and I remembered hearing this posh sounding dude like passionately presenting about investing in gold. And there was this scrappy little PowerPoint presentation that was displaying on your back. I don't know if you remember that. And I remembered keeping an eye on HelloGo's journey since then. And when you guys launch your ICO, and I thought to myself, man, these guys are gonna have a hard time convincing people that they're not a Ponzi scheme because you have gold, you have crypto, which a lot of the bad actors were kind of using it as a medium back then, right? But as a user and someone who's been following your journey for a very long time, quite sad to see the app go. But as the saying goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. So I'm sure that there are a lot of valuable lessons to be learned here. So let's jump into it. Thanks for joining us, by the way, Robin.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah.
And no,
So,
we're
hmm?
not a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, I know that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be putting money in myself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Robin, why don't you walk us through what were some of the critical moments that led to the decision of closing down HelloGo's consumer business?
Well, I think to really trace the challenges that led to the decision we made recently, it actually goes back to, I'm going to say, more or less when we first launched in 2017. When we started HelloGold, we always wanted to be B2B2C, primarily because we knew the target market that we're going after and the problems we're trying to solve, which was for the mass market, which are invariably low value customers. And we somehow had to try and make sure cost of acquisition versus the value of the customer kind of made sense. And I mean, the math ultimately has to work for us. Um, but when we launched back in 2017, if you can remember way back then,
Mm, mm,
many digital platforms available. There weren't any wallets. So we wanted to work with corporates, but unfortunately, we weren't able to get any corporate partnerships activated. And as a result of that, and tragically, we had to pivot to B2C. Um, um, recognizing the challenges of pivoting to B2C. And as much as we tried on the B2C path over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, um, it was a hard slog for all the
mm,
reasons that everyone knows. And through the pandemic, it was looking quite interesting. Trajectory was not as steep as we would have liked, but it was growing. Um, but coming out of lockdown, it kind of started falling off quite dramatically. And so, much as we tried to keep it going, it just made sense for us to stop the B2C
mm,
and pivot back to the B2B to C proposition. So we're now just focused on
mm,
the corporate angle and putting all our eggs
mm.
into that basket.
Some follow-up questions there, and I think let's break our chat up into two sections, like what happened and what's next. So,
Mm.
for now, we'll focus on what happened first. Do you think that the decline had anything to do with the fact that at one point you guys changed your fee structure? Because I remember there was a fee structure change in between, right? Did you see any significant drop ever since that structure change?
Um, no, not really. We
Mm,
actually made the fees cheaper, and that was
mm,
always the plan. Where we could, whenever we could, as we scaled up, we would try to make it more affordable. Um,
mm,
but the reality was, it was just a simple question of numbers, right? We need
Mm,
we up until, I'm gonna say, 2022,
mm.
things were looking, I mean, I wouldn't say healthy would be too much of an exaggeration. It was looking optimistic. I mean, if
Right.
if if we had continued in that trajectory, I think we would have been
Mm,
a relatively decent place, and I don't think we would have
mm,
had to make. It was really coming out of lockdown. I mean, as
mm,
horrible as the pandemic was, when people were
mm,
unable to go out and spend, they had a lot more discretionary
mm,
money at the end of the month before the next paycheck came.
mm,
Put that money away somewhere, and some of that came into HelloGold. Um,
mm,
but coming out of lockdown, people go out, they could start spending again. They had
mm,
less money. Then you also had the double whammy of
mm,
inflation. So whatever they spent on was a lot more expensive, and and you know they were taking money of HelloGold. So the flip side to that, the positive to that was that gold kind of did what it was supposed to do. When you needed the
mm.
money to take it out. Unfortunately for us, um, that also meant that our revenues came back too.
Okay, very cool. Thanks for that insight. And I think last week you went on BFM with Roshan to do an interview, and you mentioned in the interview that over 30 million ringgit was returned, with about 10 million more to go, and about 50,000 more users haven't given the account details to you guys, so you can't return the money yet. How's the progress on this in the past few days? Has that number kind of gone up a little bit?
Yes, we are processing payments. It's not go when the cash isn't going out fast enough, to be
Mm,
perfectly honest. So we're gonna have to just manage that for a while. So the plan is to do daily processing for the rest of the week,
mm,
at the end of this week, and then thereafter we'll do it once a week, and then from the next month, and then after that once a month,
mm.
and then we'll just keep on doing it until it goes to zero. Yeah.
Hopefully, everybody comes to claim their money very soon.
Yes,
There
please.
are
Yeah.
there are some questions coming in from the
Yeah.
audience, but let me just run through a few more questions before we start taking in the live questions as well. Um, I can imagine that this conversation probably wasn't an easy one internally. Like, can you give us a window into what that conversation was like with your co-founder and with your internal team and your investors?
Well, it's always. I mean, yeah, it wasn't easy, but then
Mm,
again, we've always. I mean, most startups. I mean, reading somewhere before I started this journey that 90% of all startups fail within their first year. And one of the challenges that we
yeah.
have, our business model, is that we're looking after people's money. So we always need to think about, what do we do in the event of failure. So we kind of
Mm,
have, to borrow from the banking industry, a kind of living will, what to
mm,
do if we failed. So every now and again, we revisit this. We start to
mm,
revisit this a lot more frequently in the last couple of months. So we're all grown ups. We kind of knew that,
yeah.
things can always go pear shaped. I think the big challenge
Mm,
is to recognize, there's a fine balance between um, sticking at it and just fighting fighting every step of the way, and
mm,
uh, not listening to the naysayers and all that kind of stuff, and
mm, mm,
courageous. Then there's another thing where you're just hoping for something to happen. And
mm,
to borrow football parlance, when you have left everything out in the field and there's nothing left to
mm,
give, you can't figure out what else to do. That's probably
mm,
time. And on the retail space, on the B2B,
mm,
B2C side, um, frankly, we were, both Ridwan, my co-founder, and I were chatting
mm.
with, and that was basically, you know, we ran out of ideas.
But I think you brought up a good point over there, right? And I think, as entrepreneurs, the mindset is always to uh, keep grinding, keep going at it, and kind of never give up, right? And to some extent, there's always some degree of sunk cost fallacy when things don't quite work out as they should. Um, how can founders, in their journey of trying to validate their business model and product, kind of avoid drinking their Kool-Aid and their own Kool-Aid and know when to call it quits in your view?
That is a very good question. When I first started, I read this book. Actually, I have
Mm,
it somewhere, and it was about this startup. And what was interesting about the book, I'll find it
mm,
later, that it kind of said that a lot of people read a lot of startup books, and they typically
mm,
uh, talk to successes. They don't talk to the failures, and more importantly, they don't talk about everyone else in the middle, right? So if you think about
mm, mm,
the startup ecosystem, maybe 10% are incredibly successful from day one and awesome, and you hear
mm,
those stories, and they go down in mythology. Then you hear about spectacular failures, and also you hear
mm,
that and everything that goes wrong. Actually, what you don't hear about is the
mm,
stuff. The vast majority of us are in that
yeah.
messy middle,
Mm,
and when I read it, it became very clear that there is no
mm,
one answer. Um,
mm.
you have to drink from the Kool-Aid, particularly if everyone's saying you're idiots and you're doing things wrong, because otherwise you
Mm,
flip the end of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum. But on the other hand, you got to be conscious enough that you're drinking from the Kool-Aid. so, so it's not that. And at some point, and I think for us, and like I come back to the point, right? For as long as you think
mm,
there is something else you can do that can make a meaningful difference to whatever it is that you
mm,
have tried to do and hasn't worked, and you say, okay, I'll try B and C, and then all the way to Z. I mean, once you go to AA,
mm,
and you can keep on going, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think once you
mm,
run out of ideas and you're kind of hoping, as
mm,
opposed to planning, then I think
mm,
probably when the Kool-Aid's at its dregs, and you probably have to take a hard look at life.
mm.
Yeah.
So when it's mostly hope rather than strategy, that's when you're like, yeah, maybe I should reconsider this. And I think you brought up a point of like sometimes we only look at the big successes and the big failures which we see on Apple TV and Netflix these days with their series about all the Silicon Valley massive screw ups, right? But I guess that speaks to a degree of survivor's bias where we see the successful entrepreneurs giving this kind of advice that may or not apply to the vast majority in the middle, as you said. Let's take some questions from the audience before I jump back to some of my questions. Let's see. We have a question from Shahzad over here. Shahzad is asking, if you had to repeat HelloGold's business, what would you have done differently?
You know, I questioned myself quite a lot throughout the years,
Mm,
because I mean, as an entrepreneur, actually, it's not just entrepreneur. In
mm,
business, the big challenge is that you typically have to make a decision with the information you have.
true.
And sometimes these are big calls, and sometimes these are not big calls. The big difference
Mm,
between a startup versus a corporate, right, is that if you get it wrong, you have next year. You might miss your
mm,
bonus.
mm,
This you have
mm,
next year. With startups, particularly in this region, you get it wrong, there may not be a next year. So even
or
if it's
next
a
month.
and even though it may be a two-way door, you go through enough two-way doors, all doors become one way. Um,
Mm,
so I think the hindsight is wonderful. When I look at
mm,
the things that we have done, um, I don't think there are many decisions that we made that we would have made
mm,
differently, given the
mm,
information that we had at that point in time.
mm,
Having said that, I think you know the if I had perfect information at that point in
mm,
time, clearly we would have stuck to our B2B2C strategy because we thought about why that made sense versus a B2C, and,
mm,
and just waited it out, maybe just hold fire, preserve cash, do anything, um, and then just not go down that B2C path. Um,
Mm.
because we knew why we didn't want to do it, and
Mm.
doing it kind of proved that we were right in not wanting to do it. Uh, so that's probably the one biggest thing. But at that point in time,
Mm.
we had a choice to make, right? Either we just do nothing and just sit
Mm.
there, or we go for it. And it was a call we made because we
Mm.
had a roadmap and a plan and milestones to achieve for our investors.
Mm.
Hindsight should have just told the investors, corporates aren't ready. They're just going to sit
Yeah.
there, twiddle our thumbs for the
Mm.
next until they're ready. Um, so that's probably the biggest thing.
Mm. And I guess the B2C game is notoriously expensive, right? And I don't think there's a lot of deal flow going on around in Malaysia for most businesses to be able to succeed in that model. I think if you look at all the fintechs in the space where they've seen some degree of success with the mass market, are those who are typically backed by really large corporates, right? So I guess that's also the question of whether we have the right type of investors with the kind of appetite to sustain having this kind of funding into customer acquisition for a long period of time for you to gain some sort of critical mass. But my follow-up question to you, Robin, is that whether the whole B2B2C model was even a realistic route to go down in 2017, because I don't think there were a lot of platform plays back then that would enable some kind of embedded wealth play, or there weren't even a lot of digital options to purchase gold other than a few gold ETFs here and there, right? So was that even an available route actually?
Um, well, I remember when we were building the platform in 2016,
Mm, mm.
mobile wallets. I mean, fintech was. I'm not even sure it was even a thing. At the
There was
time.
like five guys in the room, you know.
Yeah, something like that. But we took the view that
Mm,
mobile wallets was going to be a thing. Um,
mm,
we thought that by the time we launch, it would be ready. The
mm,
wallet would be ready, and we took the view that they would want to. All these guys ultimately will want to pivot into the financial services space. So the big course, at
mm,
least at a strategic level, we kind of got right. Now, your question
mm,
about whether they're ready, willing, and able. One of the challenges that certainly we faced in
mm,
dealing with these large corporates is that they wanted to. I mean, we've had a lot of calls with corporates, discussions
mm,
down to partnerships, sign them, and some of them were able to. We even to integrate it with some of them, but for
mm,
various reasons, they weren't ready to launch. And I think one of the challenges that we faced and I had not anticipated
mhm,
that you know corporates can afford to reprioritize for whatever reason,
mm,
defer. But as a startup, you invest time and capacity to build something and integrate with a large corporate. Um, that's expending a lot of capital, which is limited.
mm,
And when they then decide that they don't want to do it, and they're perfectly entitled to do that for whatever reason, it kind of buggers you up, and it
mm,
certainly set us back. So um, I'm not saying that B2B2C is easy because it has its own set of challenges, of which getting corporates across the line to sign a deal and then getting them
mm,
start building the platform or integrating with you and then getting them to
mm.
activate it. I mean, uh, I, with hindsight, I guess I was
Mm,
naive to think that if you ink the deal, everything is
mm,
done. That was clearly not the
yeah.
case.
I think both routes have its own inherent challenges, right? And I remember speaking to some entrepreneurs and they're like, oh, maybe we should have gone down the B2C route because while waiting for the corporates to make the decision, they're like, you know what, we're kind of out of runway right now, and we don't really have numbers to convince investors with. So I think,
Yes.
I guess, really need to think about what is the right model for the right business. But as you said, hindsight is perfect. It's always easy to go like, yeah, I wish I've done that instead. But let's take some more questions from the audience. Let's see if there's anything else before we move on to the what's next section of our chat today. We have something here from Dave. Dave is asking if your first funding from ICO somehow influenced any of your business decisions or strategy back then.
Yes, but not in the way that I think you're alluding to. The
Mm,
I mean, I I am a huge fan of the potential of tokenization now as I
mm,
was back then, primarily because I believe that it can enable people to truly access potential opportunities that otherwise they weren't able to, regardless of the size of their wallet.
mm,
For example, very few of us had the opportunity to invest in Alibaba when it first started, unless you knew Jack Ma
mm,
or you were LP in a
mm,
VC. You know, but in an ICO space, you can potentially do that because it's truly global.
mm,
So from an investor standpoint, you have the opportunity to participate at a seed round. And
mm,
for startups, particularly in the region and especially in Malaysia, it's hugely challenging to raise
mm,
serious capital unless unless you're doing, particularly in the tech space, right? If
mm,
I recall back in the day when we were looking for money, uh,
mm,
VCs will give you like 200 ringgit, 200,000 ringgit in your seed round, and they say
mm,
go play with that and build something. And frankly, you can't build much with 200,000 ringgit. I mean, your
mm.
team of 3 devs, and you run out of runway after 6 months. Whereas the ICO will give people capital
Mm,
to build something and have a serious stab at making it successful. Having said that,
mm,
the as you kind of said, Vincent, earlier, the ICO space
mm.
that's quite pretty racy. The story remains quite racy.
It's
But
a
then
wild west.
it's yeah. So I think our from an how it impacted us was that it was highly detrimental to us
Mm,
in the conversations that we had with partners,
mm,
because they saw that we did an ICO and they basically thought, as we kind of said just now,
yeah,
are we a scam and stuff like that. And
yeah.
major global partners that we were just in discussions with
Mm,
shortly after the ICO just walked away, and these were massive
mm,
partners, right? That would have, I mean, I'm not saying they would have made all the difference, but it was
mm,
quite interesting that these big
mm,
global players that had reach around the world
mm.
basically said they couldn't get the deal past their
Yeah.
compliance team. So yes, it affected us
Mm,
just hugely, and from
mm,
just
yeah.
our playbook, and we had to kind of
Mm,
basically hide the fact that we did an ICO and put everything
mm,
ICO related
mm.
into a
The
back
back
burner.
end. Mm, mm. So kind of like two follow-up questions to that, right? Um, I think the first follow-up question is, as you said, ICOs give you access to funds that you otherwise might not have been able to raise, right? And if I recall correctly, maybe at that point the value is somewhere between 8 or 9 million US dollars, if memory serves me correctly. Do you think you would have been able to raise that money otherwise outside of ICO, and without that fund, do you think HelloGo would have gone that far? And the
Yeah.
second follow-up question would be like, looking back, would you have not done the ICO, or would you have continued with the ICO? Actually, I have a third follow-up question, but let's stick to these two first.
So we, so we raised a total of $10 million
10 million. Okay, all right.
from the ICO. However,
Mm,
we were the last ICO in China, and
mm,
after we were given all that money, or
mm,
those ether, because China went basically banned all ICOs about a
Mm,
decade
mm, 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 mm.
after we completed our ICO. We sent $5 million back to China, so we ended up raising five. Um, so would we have raised that money elsewhere? I think if we were not in Malaysia,
Mm,
possibly
mm,
we're like in America or Europe,
mm,
and then raising that kind of money is not unreasonable.
mm.
Um, but certainly in Malaysia, it would have been unprecedented, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
That's given where we were at that point in time. So
Even at the current time, to set some context, right? If you look at another wealth platform like Pitchin, which is equity crowdfunding, and they've reached a degree of maturity, they're market leaders. They've only now raised 5 million from Gobi partners and the rest, right? So at
yeah,
that stage of HelloGo, so early, I think, like you said, it would be extremely challenging. Sorry,
yeah.
carry on.
No, so I think one of the big
Mm,
challenges, you know, for techs in Malaysia
mm,
is the the fundraising ecosystem. I
mm,
think it's
certainly.
is suboptimal, and I think it disadvantages us because we have, I mean,
Mm,
we have a lot of issues in the space, and if you have to hire folks from say Vietnam or Bangladesh,
mm,
they have to go to somewhere, you know, we pay them in ringgit with ringgit salaries, or they can go to Singapore,
mm,
share Thailand, and get paid more. So it becomes
mm.
a human capital issue, but it's
True.
a function of how
Mm,
much we have, and firepower
mm,
we have versus the firepower of a similar startup in other neighboring countries. Yeah.
true.
So what's your last question?
So the second follow up question was, knowing that what you know now, would you still have done the ICO?
Um, interesting. Uh, I don't know, man. It's like that's a tough one. Um, it is not. I mean, it is the wild, wild west, and
Mm,
I'm not sure at a personal level. No, as
mm,
as as a company going out to raise money, yes, but
mm,
there is a huge, and less so now, I guess, but certainly in
mm,
2018, 2019, there was a
mm. Big
huge
downside.
about the whole thing when we talked to partners, banks, etc.
Yeah.
You know, I
So
think now
speaking
it's
of partners,
slightly more acceptable, but even so,
yeah,
things that happen in the
the
space make people think twice still.
the view of it is quite different now. Yeah. Speaking of like partners, right? And this is another consideration that I was thinking about because Hello Gold did go down the whole Sharia route.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of institutional money coming from Sharia compliant funds. And I think at the point where you raise your ICO, there weren't very clear fatwas on where ICO stands, right? Whether Sharia compliant, not Sharia compliant. There were a lot of differing views on that. At that point, I don't know if you sought after partners before this Sharia compliant place. If you did, was that a hindrance as well? The fact that you had a ICO out.
Well, no, not really, because
Mm,
the we were Sharia compliant. Uh, we
mm.
uh, we worked with Amani to make sure that what we did was Sharia compliant, so it was okay.
No,
So
okay, got it.
it
So
was
let's
more less of a hindrance than the overarching issue of
ah
space.
okay, good to have some insights on that. Let's move on to the next portion of our chat, which is to talk about what's next for HelloGo. So who is the target market over here for your white labeling play?
Well, so I mean, we have a
Mm,
pipeline of potential partners, and they're
mm,
all various stages of that funnel.
mm,
Um, and we are in discussions with them to integrate the HelloGold platform
mm,
into them and to white label it as
mm,
whatever it's called or whatever it is.
mm,
So with a lower burn and also um, without the need to look at the retail space and divert
mm,
resources, that we can really focus on this thing and see where that takes us. What's
mm,
interesting is that um, over the last week or so since we announced the
mm,
closure of the retail business, we've had a number of parties come to us for partnership discussions.
mm.
So in some sense, we should have closed this thing maybe 12 months ago.
Yeah, in fact, there was some context of mine asking me to make the introduction to further explore. I'll pass you some context later as well. But
It's
I guess my question
interesting,
is,
yeah,
sorry?
that's happened. It's interesting that a
Yeah.
number of business leads have come out as a result of the closure of the retail business. Right.
You know what they say, right? When one door closes, another opens. I guess that's true in this case. But I'm just curious, Robin. Like, I'm sure you've had a lot of these conversations with various partners and whatnot. How difficult is it to convince them? Seeing as with Hello Gold, you kind of shown in a way that the B2C model for digital gold is extremely difficult, right? Do you think they look at that and feel a little bit apprehensive about going into that product line if they don't really have that product line?
Um, no, the
Mm,
the B2C model is extremely difficult if you don't have a brand presence and you have a limited
mm,
marketing budget. It
mm,
is not, I fundamentally believe it is not difficult if you have a large installed
mm,
customer base that you can tap into,
mm,
um,
mm,
and you can then acquire customers at a very low cost.
mm,
And in some of in the early days of the mobile wallet war, we could see that. I mean, you could see the
mm,
traction that it was generating with an installed customer base. So, um,
mm,
the folks that we talk to, they I think they kind of get it,
mm,
or based on why we think it's okay and we think it's workable, and but they like gold because for all the reasons that people want to save in gold. I mean, the financial benefits of gold versus holding ringgit or Malaysian equities.
mm. Okay, got it. Cool. There are some other questions. I think another one from David again. Dave is asking, your game plan, your survival plan, lessons learned
This
moving
is
forward
Dave
into your next
and that
role.
long time ago. I just wonder.
I don't know.
It's
I don't
been
know if
12.
you've met him, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that was, and so look. I mean, things can always go wrong.
Mm,
It's if it was a sure thing, I would have done it. So on the B2B space, the biggest challenge is that people take too long, like you kind of said earlier with some of the other fintech players, that they waited so long for people to make a decision that they ran out of cash, and they want to pivot to B2C. So
mm,
that to me is the biggest challenge, because what's interesting about the HelloGold platform and the partnership
mm,
opportunities that we have is that we have had and we continue to have a pipeline of opportunities from Malaysia all the way to Africa.
mm,
So theoretically, it's huge. The,
mm,
the the tragedy, and whether it's just arse luck or whether it's just I'm not
mm,
very good, is that we haven't been able to close the deal, activate the relationship.
mm. Will be quite a challenge moving forward, and I hope you guys have some success in that space. I'm curious though. The other thing that I was wondering, what is the economics like for your potential partner to either build it themselves versus just white labeling your solution?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, um, anyone can build it themselves, right? It's
Mm-hmm,
just
mm-hmm,
hire a tech team,
mm,
UX UI guys, set up the operation. So I'm not building a driverless car. I mean,
mm.
it's not beyond their capability or their funding capacity to do it themselves. The real
Mm,
challenge is whether what this is absolutely core to their strategy, in which case they probably will build it to them, their business strategy, in which
mm,
they probably will build it themselves, or whether it's incremental to their business strategy, which is oftentimes the case. So, if we talk to a mobile operator, right, they want to do financial services, they'll outsource those products, right, to us, to someone else, etc. They don't really want to build it themselves. They're in the business of mobile or data. So the cost isn't just a dollars and cents cost, it's actually the resource allocation cost. Do I allocate a whole bunch of people that I could otherwise use in a more important part of the business? As long as the economics kind of make sense, I think they will do they will build it. They will outsource it, which is what we do. I think it's highly unlikely that we'll go and build this for public goal, right? Because it's actually for strategy, but for a financial service player, telco, post office, absolutely it's very viable.
Okay. So in other words, there's still a gap that you think you guys are able to address in this market.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, think about I mean, and you see this model everywhere. Computers, laptops, the microprocessor is actually core to the system, and each company can build their own, but they choose to Intel or AMD. I think Apple may be the exception to the norm, but but you see the play, right? This is what am I good at? What do I want to focus on? I don't really want to focus on R&D on microchips. I outsource that to someone else.
So to switch gears a little bit, I'm just thinking about the larger, wider implications of HelloGold shutting down its consumer business, right? And I think at the height of HelloGold, the popularity is there. It's well known. Consumers do use your services. I think you had how many users?
I think we
The
had.
numbers are scared.
When we shut down last week, we had about 60,000 active users and about 80,000 customers with all or cash in the account.
Do you think that would impact the general consumer trust towards putting money with startups, particularly wealth products? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I like to think not, because one of the biggest challenges, before we started HelloGold was there are all these gold-related scams, right? Geneva, etc. So, and certainly even now, if you go to social media, you'll see people saying that we're scamming because they haven't got their funds in, funds out. Because unfortunately, of all the weeks that I could have chosen to close the business, I closed the business on a week a lot of public holidays.
So, but then again, the entire month was full of public holidays.
So I think an orderly wind down where people get their funds back, I think hopefully will reassure consumers out there that fintechs can conduct themselves properly and they can do an orderly wind up of the business in a way that is as efficient as possible for them. So I don't think it's going to be bad. I actually think it should be rationally be a good thing.
So, I mean, in your case, you guys thought about, like you said earlier, you adapted some of the living wills kind of framework from the banks and whatnot. And on your part, you guys decided to remain ethical to your consumers to return their funds. But based on the current regulatory framework in Malaysia, are consumers protected with a case where another version of HelloGo closes down and the founder is a little bit less ethical? Do you think they are sufficiently protected around it?
So for sure, right? I mean, I think you are protected. I mean, it comes in two forms. You can be legally protected, or your investment can be protected. I think for sure they're legally protected, because if you scam, it's still a crime. I mean, it may be a crime under Banggar regs or whatever, but it's still a crime. Report it to the police, etc. you may not get your money back, but you've still committed a crime. That does get, you know.
Mm,
Now, uh, the so I think there's sufficient legal protection. Um,
mm,
you know, whether you ultimately can get your funds back, that's
mm,
something else. I don't think the protection is
mm,
any less strong in Malaysia than in most other mature markets.
mm.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So let's take one last question from the audience, and then maybe we'll do some closing thoughts. The final question, I guess, to kind of sum it up, is how is the transition like? In terms of resources, talent, any challenges in this transition to a B2B model?
I'm trying to understand the question. Don't really understand the
Basically,
second one.
I guess was the challenge of transitioning to a B2B model difficult in terms of your existing talent and your existing resources? How is that transition? I think it's the question that this audience member is trying to ask.
Okay, so generally no, um, because we've always been building towards a B2B model,
Mm,
and,
mm,
and once the 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 B2C thing was up and running,
mm,
we've been trying to get a white label product out into the market through
mm,
and so in some ways n- there is no change apart from the fact that we now have no revenue. you know?
it's a pretty big change, I would say.
So from an organizational perspective,
Yeah.
there's limited change because
Mm,
the devs are working on the
mm,
platform, making sure the APIs for partnership integration are
mm,
good. But from a financial
mm,
standpoint, the top line revenue has disappeared.
mm,
So we're now in the space of the folks that you're talking about, where they're waiting for the
mm,
B2B to kick off, but nor do we
mm,
have the cost associated with running that
mm,
business. So it's like net. There's marginal
mm,
difference
mm.
in the economics.
Mm. So surely internally, you might have to do some restructuring now that you're pivoting back to a different model, right? Were there job losses? Were there job reallocations? Walk us through some of the internal. Mm,
We've had to let go. Uh,
mm,
we're involved in marketing,
mm,
and, and with a B2B, we also had to let go of some of a couple of the tech
mm,
resources. So we're much slimmer,
mm,
now as a team, you know. But as these things ramp
mm,
up, well, as these things will hopefully ramp up, then
mm,
that's the plan.
mm. Hopefully, that's the plan, right?
Yeah,
Um, so maybe just a final closing thoughts. I mean, out of all of these lessons learned over the years, are you able to distill it into some parting words or little nuggets of wisdoms for the rest of the entrepreneurs that's tuning in today?
well, I mean, the only thing is that um,
Mm.
you don't do this if
Okay, that's at the end. Don't do this. Just don't do this.
you have to do this. You have to do this. Can't do this for the money. You have to do this
Mm,
because if you don't, it's like the way I described it at the beginning is still the way I would describe it. I had an itch and I needed to scratch it, and the itch was trying to
mm,
build this thing and make it successful. Um, and it wasn't the money. I mean, money would be a
mm,
nice consequence of it.
mm,
I did it because I thought I could do it, and I thought it was going to create
mm,
public good. Um, and I think if you go in with that, then um, that will sustain you because
mm,
the ebb and flow, the highs and lows.
mm,
If you're lucky, awesome, but I wasn't lucky. I'm not sure most in Malaysia are that lucky. Um,
mm,
So you kind of need to have you need to have something to hold on to, and
Mm,
for me, it wasn't. It was trying to do this thing and getting it up there.
mm, mm,
Yeah, do it for the right reasons, and money
mm,
ain't.
for sure. I suspect for many of our entrepreneurs out there with their corporate experience, they probably get paid more with a cushy corporate job, I would imagine.
Oh yes, I used to have one. I used to have like have this
Well, with that, Robin, it only leaves me to thank you for this very frank and open sharing session. And we wish you all the best with your pivot to B2B kind of play. Thank you, Robin. Catch you
Thank
soon.
you. Take care.
Uh,
Bye.
take care now. Bye bye.